From a recently retired welterweight legend to the words of those closely involved themselves, getting a gauge on how the fighting world actually feels about the recent purchase of the WWE by Endeavor has been pretty difficult, but that's where we come in. And for today's video, we're bringing you the MMA world's real opinions on this massive merger. The first time most combat sports fans would have heard the name Endeavor was, of course, when the Area Manual-led company decided to splash the cash and purchase the UFC for a $4.2 billion sum back in 2016. And in the time since, they have very clearly gotten a serious return on their investment. And now it appears as though Endeavor are looking to throw some of that money around this time, in the form of one of the biggest mergers in sporting history. Endeavor have moved to go into business with the legendary Vince McMahon, buying the WWE in a bid to unite both it and the UFC under the same corporate banner. What does this mean for the sport? Well, let's check in with some of MMA's biggest names and find out. Say what you want about Jorge Masvidal, but the dude is most certainly headed towards a great post-UFC career life. And like any man who wants to venture into the world of promotion, the game-bred boxing head honcho made sure to play his cards right, speaking only with the highest levels of praise for the UFC, the WWE, Endeavor, and this deal. Look, maybe he is genuinely excited about the prospects of this agreement, but Jorge's got to keep his options open. Make no mistake, this is a dude who knows how to play the game.
So for them to have that avenue to now be able to fight, and hopefully the UFC and Endeavor can make it easy for them to transition once they're too old to compete and fighting and going to WWE, the right guys that could make the fit in the right girls, I love it.
Speaking of people who know exactly what they're doing when it comes to the business side of this sport, Conor McGregor was always likely to give his opinion one way or another. And like Masvidal, he decided to go down the route of praising everyone involved, knowing full well that he helped the UFC in their $12 billion valuation. But it's not just the big-name superstars who had their say. Fan favorite and former Ultimate Fighter winner Kelvin Gastelum chimed in with his take. And by the sound of things, he's clearly a wrestling fan. According to the former interim title challenger, the deal sounds like a win-win for all involved, and it helps to provide opportunities for the fighters under UFC contract. Then what's not to love?
Hopefully we see some mergers going on. Who knows? Maybe we see somebody like Conor merging over, something like that.
You wouldn't want to put the mask on?
Put a luchador mask on? Why not? Get Kane and me in a tag team.
And how about another big pro wrestling fan, the former two-weight world champion, Daniel Cormier? Now, of course, DC is a company man through and through. And on his ESPN show, DC and RC, he was never going to be too likely to speak ill of the UFC. Because let's face it, they kind of pay his bills. But even still, Cormier, lest we forget, has always been a huge fan of pro wrestling. And in the past, he has even appeared in the WWE. So his enthusiasm might be expected, but it does seem like it's pretty genuine, all things considered.
$22 billion between the two. How big of a news, how newsworthy is this news that WME not only owns the UFC, but now they own the WWE?
But one man who wouldn't be drawn into giving an overly emotional response was the newly reinstated middleweight champion of the world, Israel Adesanya. When Izzy wants to talk, he can be relied on to give lengthy, thought-provoking, and often memorable answers. But sometimes his dry wit and sense of humor gives us an answer like this one. Tell us what you really think, Izzy.
You know, the way he said to Stone Cold, everything I'm going to put. I felt that. So that's why I shared that. And also it's dope track, dope highlights. So yeah, and it was WrestleMania weekend. So it was a nice little homage to the merger.
But not everybody is as sold on the idea of this merger being all it's cracked up to be. And as you might expect, a lot of the names speaking out with questions aren't actually attached to the UFC. Because if there's one thing Dana White doesn't like, it's tough questions from the media and from his own fighters. One former UFC heavyweight, Brendan Schaub, wasn't afraid to question just how this deal makes the sport look. Because while the WWE is a staple within the sports entertainment world, the UFC and the sport of MMA as a whole is a lot more serious as a product. WWE is scripted, MMA is not. And Brendan can't help but wonder whether the UFC doing business with the WWE will blur the lines between fiction and reality to any noticeable degree. Sure, Brendan doesn't always get it right. Hell, he actually gets it wrong more often than not. But he certainly does raise an interesting point here. He does go on to predict that Brock Lesnar will use this deal as a means of making an easy transition back to the UFC for one more fight against Jon Jones, which might be a stretch given his age and inactivity. But it's a fun thought. Another man who is very hesitant to get too excited here is the undefeated, undisputed Chael Sonnen. Chael is never one to be afraid to speak his mind. And on that note, he made it clear that he does not think that this deal means that the UFC and the WWE will be working as closely as people might assume. Sure, you'll see the connection here and there, but Sonnen argues that we have already watched the two sports collide in the past.
What I thought
along the way, I thought WME represented Vince and company, and I thought Vince left WME for CAA. I believe he's at CAA right now, but it was WME that stepped in and bought the deal. I'm close on that.
Wrestlers like CM Punk and Brock Lesnar have tried their hand at fighting in the octagon to varying degrees of success, just like mixed martial artists such as Ronda Rousey and Cain Velasquez have proven to be hits in the world of pro wrestling. But this deal isn't going to mean that Vince McMahon will be showing up at a UFC press conference or anything like that. Chael is pretty realistic about this deal being more about the two businesses separately than a tag team up. So what does Dana White himself think? Well, obviously, as the face and president of the UFC, Dana won't be drawn into actually speaking his mind about anything relating to the business, but he does seem to be hopeful for the future of the sport.
There's no, we had Brock come over here, we had Ronda go over there. That's all. If that's ever possible, if guys leave here and they love wrestling and they're good enough to do it, before this deal, we would have been good with that.
And in the past, he has always had good things to say about Vince McMahon as a businessman. And when Vince and Endeavor head Ari Emanuel officially fielded some questions when the merger was announced, they were very clearly happy and excited about the directions both companies would be taking. However, the less we say about Vince's mustache, the better. Who knows what he was thinking when he decided to go for this look? But if you ask us, it looks like he was plucked straight out of the 1920s. And we're not sure if that's a good thing. But according to Emanuel, his company Endeavor will not be interfering too much with the creative practices of the WWE. This has been quite clear during the 6 years he has spent with the UFC. Apart from the obvious business changes, the UFC have more or less retained full control over their model, and with Dana White still at the helm, Endeavor seem to know a good thing when they see it. Whether this move proves to be as fruitful as their lucrative run in MMA or not, only time will tell. But to end on a less serious note, how about a pair of UFC legends in the making that decided to bring their A game in celebration of this merger? We all know that Robert Whittaker and Alexander Volkanovski are among the two most likable characters in the sport of MMA. Two guys who can always be relied on to put their fighting egos to one side and simply entertain the fans with their natural wit and charisma. But even by their lofty standards, this was truly hilarious. Both men dressed up in the guise of their favorite WWE superstars. The former middleweight champion Whittaker came out in full Hulk Hogan regalia, while the current featherweight king and pound-for-pound contender Alexander Volkanovski did his best Stone Cold Steve Austin impression, which was made even funnier by the fact that Volk stands at a mere 5'6" tall. But that's the reaction from the fighting world, folks. From those who are totally on board with this groundbreaking deal to those who understand that they will never see a piece of this pie. These have been the opinions from both sides of the coin when it comes to this landmark deal between Endeavor and the WWE. Only time will tell how successful it will actually be.